chamber is quiet, but the air is heavy with something close to fear. It is not the fear of invasion, nor of foreign armies crossing the ocean. It is the fear of collapse, of a nation tearing itself apart from the inside. The year is 1820. The United States is still young, still unsure whether it is an experiment or a destiny. North and South stare at one another across the floor of Congress, divided by slavery, power, and the future of the Union itself. One vote, many believe, could end the American project entirely. And then, slowly, Henry Clay rises to speak. He is not the president. He never will be. Yet in this room, at this moment, his words matter more than any executive order. Clay speaks not with thunder, but with patience. He does not promise victory. He promises survival. Again and again, as tempers flare and threats of secession echo through marble halls, it is Henry Clay who steps between extremes, crafting fragile compromises that no one fully loves, but everyone reluctantly accepts. They will call him the Great Compromiser. His critics will call him weak. History, however, will reveal something else entirely. Without Henry Clay, the Union might have shattered decades before the Civil War ever began. Without his deals, his speeches, his sleepless nights inside Congress, America may never have lived long enough to become the nation we know today. Tonight, as you settle in to rest, we tell the story of a man whose battlefield was the legislature, whose weapon was persuasion, and whose legacy was time, precious time, bought for a divided nation standing on the edge. If you enjoy calm, cinematic histories like this one, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps more curious minds find these stories. And let us know in the comments, which historical figure should we explore next before sleep takes us? Chapter 1. Born on the Edge of the Frontier, 1777 to 1797. Henry Clay entered the world on April 12, 1777, in Hanover County, Virginia, at a moment when the idea of the United States itself was still fragile and unfinished. The American Revolution was not yet won. Armies marched, currencies failed, and no one could say with confidence whether this new republic would survive its own birth. Clay's father, a Baptist minister, died when Henry was just 4 years old, leaving behind a widowed mother and 7 children. The loss was not only emotional, but practical. In post-revolutionary Virginia, there were few safety nets. Without wealth, without a powerful name, the Clay family slipped quietly into obscurity. Henry grew up knowing scarcity, not starvation, but the constant awareness that nothing was guaranteed. He was raised among tobacco fields, dirt roads, and small courthouses, places where the authority of the new nation felt distant and abstract. Government was not yet a stable presence. It was an argument still being held. Even as a boy, Clay absorbed this atmosphere of uncertainty. America was free, yes, but freedom alone did not equal unity. At 14, Henry left formal schooling and found work as a copy clerk at the High Court of Chancery in Richmond. By day, he copied legal documents in careful handwriting. By night, he listened. He listened to lawyers debate constitutional meaning, property, federal power. He listened to men argue not just cases, but visions of what the United States should become. It was there, in those quiet chambers, that Clay first encountered the power of words. Not the power of violence or command, but persuasion. The slow, patient shaping of agreement among people who did not naturally agree at all. In 1797, still barely 20, Clay made a decisive move westward, crossing the Appalachian Mountains into Kentucky, a land that was not quite settled, not quite stable, a frontier balanced between law and chaos. Kentucky mirrored the nation itself, expanding rapidly, divided in values, full of promise and risk in equal measure. Clay would later say that the frontier taught him something essential, that survival depended not on purity, but on cooperation. Rigid positions broke communities apart. Compromise held them together. Long before Henry Clay stood in Congress, long before his voice echoed through the Senate chamber, the foundation of his belief was already set: that the Union was fragile, that it could be lost, and that holding it together would require patience, empathy, and an unyielding commitment to unity over pride. The boy born into uncertainty was already becoming the man who would spend his life trying to keep America whole, one fragile agreement at a time. Chapter 2. The Young Lawyer Who Learned to Persuade, 1797 to 1806. When Henry Clay arrived in Kentucky in 1797, he entered a land that felt unfinished, a place still deciding what kind of society it would become. The frontier was not romantic. It was loud, argumentative, and often violent. Disputes over land, debt, and honor filled the courts, and the rule of law survived only because people believed in it just enough to show up. Clay arrived with little more than ambition and an education earned through observation rather than privilege. Though he lacked a formal college degree, he had trained under George Wythe, one of the most respected legal minds of the early republic. That mentorship gave Clay something more valuable than credentials: a deep respect for constitutional balance and civil debate. Kentucky's courtrooms were not polite salons. They were battlegrounds of survival, where reputations were built quickly and destroyed just as fast. Lawyers shouted, juries were skeptical, judges were practical men who valued clarity over theory. In this environment, Henry Clay discovered that eloquence alone was not enough. To succeed, one had to persuade men who did not wish to be persuaded. Clay adapted swiftly. He spoke plainly when needed, passionately when it mattered, and always with an instinctive understanding of his audience. His voice carried warmth rather than menace. He argued not as a conqueror, but as a guide, leading listeners toward conclusions they felt they had reached on their own. By his early 20s, Clay had already gained a reputation as one of Kentucky's most compelling advocates. Observers noted his ability to soften hostile rooms, to reduce complex legal disputes into human terms, and to turn confrontation into consensus. On the frontier, this was no small talent. A poorly handled argument could end in a duel. A well-handled one could hold a community together. In 1803, Clay was elected to the Kentucky legislature, stepping from the courtroom into the political arena. Here, the stakes grew higher. Debates were not about individual cases, but about land policy, state authority, and Kentucky's place within the young Union. The legislature was raw and divided, filled with men who spoke for settlers, slaveholders, merchants, and veterans of the Revolution, often all at once. Clay quickly learned that political victory achieved through humiliation was temporary. Today's defeated opponent would return tomorrow as a rival. The frontier demanded endurance, not dominance. These years shaped the core of Clay's philosophy. Force created enemies, silence created chaos. But persuasion, slow, respectful, relentless, created stability. Before Henry Clay ever entered the halls of Congress, he had already mastered the most difficult lesson of American politics: that a divided people cannot be ruled, only convinced. And on the frontier of Kentucky, he learned how to do exactly that. Chapter 3. Entering Congress Too Soon, 1806 to 1811. In 1806, Henry Clay did something few men of his age even imagined. At just 29 years old, he was sent to the United States Senate, temporarily filling a vacant seat for Kentucky. According to the Constitution, senators were required to be at least 30. Clay was underage, and everyone in Washington knew it. But the early republic was still flexible, sometimes careless, and often pragmatic. Clay was seated anyway. When he arrived in the capital, he stepped into a world ruled by older men, veterans of the Revolution, guardians of precedent, and politicians who believed that youth was a liability rather than an asset. Many saw Clay as an intruder from the frontier, loud in manner, untested in restraint. He was watched closely, and not kindly. The Senate chamber of the early 19th century was a place of controlled tension. Beneath its formal language lay deep disagreements about federal power, commerce, and slavery. The Union had survived independence, but unity was far from assured. Every new state threatened to tip the balance. Every tariff debate reopened old wounds between regions. Clay listened more than he spoke at first. He studied alliances. He learned which men sought compromise and which thrived on confrontation. And when he did speak, it became clear that this young senator was thinking beyond Kentucky, beyond region, toward the nation as a whole. His tenure was brief, but memorable. When Clay returned to the Senate again in 1809, still not yet 30, the same skepticism followed him. Yet something had changed. His arguments showed an instinct for national consequence, how a policy pleasing to one region might damage the Union as a whole. In 1811, Clay was elected to the House of Representatives, a move that puzzled some but proved decisive. Almost immediately, he was chosen as Speaker of the House, an extraordinary rise for a man barely into his 30s. It was a sign that even his critics recognized his unusual ability to manage conflict rather than inflame it. During these years, Clay encountered the first serious North-South tensions of his career. Questions of trade favored Northern industry. Southern leaders feared federal overreach. Western states demanded infrastructure and recognition. Each faction spoke loudly for itself. Few spoke for the whole. Clay tried to do exactly that. He did not deny differences. He acknowledged them openly, believing that denial only hardened resentment. But he also insisted that the Union was not a temporary alliance. It was a shared fate. To weaken it for short-term gain, he argued, was to gamble with the future of the Republic itself. Many older senators still doubted him. Some dismissed him as ambitious, others as reckless. Yet, quietly, Henry Clay was establishing a reputation that would define his life. A young man who entered Congress too soon, but who understood, sooner than most, that America's greatest threat would come not from abroad, but from within. Chapter 4. Speaker of the House and the Fires of War, 1811 to 1815. And Henry Clay was elected Speaker of the House in 1811. The choice startled Washington. He was only 34 years old, younger than many of the men he now ruled over procedurally. Yet the vote was decisive. Members sensed that Clay possessed something rare, the ability to direct chaos without crushing dissent. The House he inherited was restless and angry. British ships still harassed American sailors. Trade was strangled by foreign blockades. On the western frontier, native resistance, encouraged, many believed, by Britain, threatened settlers. To many Americans, independence felt incomplete, even humiliated. Clay gave voice to that frustration. As Speaker, he broke with tradition, using the position not merely to moderate debate, but to shape the agenda. He innovated younger nationalist members, later known as the War Hawks, and pushed the nation towards a decision it had long avoided. To Clay, war was not reckless ambition. It was a demand for respect. In June 1812, the United States declared war on Great Britain. The war that followed was confused, poorly supplied, and deeply unpopular in parts of the country. New England merchants opposed it bitterly. Federalists spoke openly of secession. State militias refused federal orders. The nation went to war while arguing about whether it should exist at all. Clay never wavered. From the Speaker's chair, he defended the conflict as a test of national honor and survival. If the United States retreated now, he believed, it would signal weakness not only to foreign powers, but to itself. Yet as the war dragged on, the cost became undeniable. Washington was burned. The treasury was strained. Political divisions widened. For a moment, it seemed possible that America might fracture under the weight of its own contradictions, fighting an external enemy while internally divided. Clay understood the danger. Even as he supported the war, he worked tirelessly to keep debate within constitutional bounds. He resisted efforts to silence dissent, believing that suppression would tear the Union faster than disagreement ever could. When peace finally came with the Treaty of Ghent in 1814, Clay was among the American negotiators, crossing the Atlantic not as a firebrand, but as a diplomat. There, too, he demonstrated the skill that defined him: firmness without humiliation, compromise without surrender. The war ended without territorial gain, but with something Clay valued more: survival. The Union had endured its first great stress test. As the cannons fell silent, Henry Clay emerged changed. He had seen how close the nation had come to collapse. He had learned that war could unite, but only briefly, and that the deeper challenge of America lay not in defeating foreign powers, but in managing its own divisions. The fires of war had not hardened him. They had clarified his purpose: to hold the Union together, even when the nation itself seemed unsure it wanted to be held. Chapter 5. America after the war. One nation, many futures. 1815 to 1819. When the War of 1812 ended, the United States entered a brief, deceptive calm. The cannons were silent, foreign threats had receded, and a new confidence settled over the young republic. Americans spoke of independence not as a fragile experiment, but as a fact. Yet beneath that confidence, the nation was already pulling itself in different directions. The country was expanding at a remarkable pace. New settlers poured westward across the Appalachians. Towns appeared almost overnight. Roads, rivers, and markets began stitching distant regions together, unevenly, imperfectly. The North industrialized. The South deepened its dependence on slavery. The West demanded access, credit, and protection. Each region imagined a different future, all under the same flag. Henry Clay watched this transformation with both optimism and unease. He believed that territorial growth alone could not hold the nation together. Expansion without integration would only magnify division. If the United States was to survive, it would need not just land, but connection. Economic, political, and psychological. From this belief emerged Clay's most ambitious vision: the American system. He proposed a national program built on 3 pillars: a protective tariff to strengthen domestic industry, a national bank to stabilize currency and credit, and federal investment in roads and canals to bind the regions together. To Clay, this was not merely economic policy. It was nation-building. Critics accused him of favoring northern manufacturers and expanding federal power at the expense of the states. Southern leaders feared tariffs. Strict constructionists rejected internal improvements. Every element of the American system provoked resistance. Clay did not retreat. He argued that regional sacrifice was the price of national survival. No section of the country could prosper alone. The Union, he insisted, must be treated as a single economic body, not a loose collection of competing interests. These debates marked the first clear emergence of the conflicts that would define the century: federal authority versus states' rights, free labor versus enslaved labor, local benefit versus national good. Clay sensed that compromise would be harder in this new America, because prosperity sharpened disagreement rather than softening it. Yet he remained convinced that shared economic interest could still create shared loyalty. In speeches and private conversations alike, Clay began to speak of the Union not just as a political arrangement, but as a moral commitment, an agreement between generations. To abandon it for short-term gain, he warned, would be to betray both the past and the future. The years after the war were often called the era of good feelings. But Clay knew better. He saw that unity, like peace, could be temporary. And so, even as the nation celebrated its survival, Henry Clay was already preparing for the next crisis. One that would test whether America was truly one nation, or merely many futures moving uneasily together. Chapter 6. The Missouri Crisis. Union on the Brink, 1819 to 1821. In 1819, a simple request arrived in Congress with the force of an earthquake. Missouri, carved from the Louisiana Purchase, sought admission to the Union as a slave state. On the surface, it was a routine matter. In reality, it exposed a fault line that had been widening for decades. At that moment, the balance between free states and slave states stood equal. Missouri's admission would tip the scales, granting the South greater power in the Senate. Northern representatives objected fiercely. To them, the spread of slavery into new territories threatened the moral and political future of the Republic. Southern leaders, in turn, warned that restricting slavery violated states' rights and endangered their way of life. The debate turned bitter almost overnight. Speeches grew longer, angrier, more personal. Words like disunion and secession, once unthinkable, began to surface openly on the floor of Congress. Newspapers inflamed passions. Ordinary citizens, many of whom had never traveled beyond their own states, found themselves choosing sides in a national argument with no clear resolution. For the first time since independence, the Union itself appeared genuinely at risk. Henry Clay, now a seasoned political leader, understood the danger with chilling clarity. This was no longer a theoretical debate about slavery. It was a test of whether Americans could still govern themselves together. Absolute victory for either side, he believed, would mean defeat for the nation. Clay stepped into the crisis not as a moral crusader, but as a guardian of survival. He worked quietly and relentlessly, holding private meetings, adjusting language, offering concessions that satisfied no one completely, and offended fewer than total defeat would have. The solution that emerged in 1820 became known as the Missouri Compromise. Missouri would enter the Union as a slave state. Maine, formerly part of Massachusetts, would enter as a free state, preserving the balance in the Senate. And a geographic line would be drawn across the Louisiana Territory, north of which slavery would be prohibited. It was an artificial line, drawn across land and conscience alike. Clay knew it would not solve the problem of slavery. It was never meant to. It was meant to delay catastrophe. When the compromise passed, there was no celebration, only relief. The Union had survived, barely. Clay himself described the moment as a reprieve, not a victory. He understood that the underlying conflict remained unresolved, buried but not healed. Still, time mattered. Each year of unity allowed the nation to grow stronger, more interconnected, and perhaps wiser. As Americans drifted uneasily back into daily life, Henry Clay carried a heavier burden. He had seen how close the country had come to tearing itself apart, and he knew, with quiet certainty, that this would not be the last time he would be called upon to stand between the Union and the abyss, armed only with compromise and the fragile hope that it would be enough. Chapter 7. The Great Compromiser is Born. The passage of the Missouri Compromise did not come easily. It was the result of months of strained negotiations, whispered conversations in hallways, and long nights where exhaustion softened positions that pride alone would never surrender. In those weeks, Congress became less a legislative body than a pressure chamber, each side afraid that yielding even an inch would shatter everything. Henry Clay was everywhere. He moved between factions with careful precision, listening more than he spoke, absorbing grievances without endorsing them. To northern opponents of slavery's expansion, he acknowledged moral unease and political fear. To southern defenders of the institution, he recognized constitutional anxieties and regional vulnerability. He did not ask either side to abandon its beliefs, only to postpone their final reckoning. Clay understood something his colleagues often did not. Compromise is not agreement. It is endurance. Drafts of the legislation failed. Amendments collapsed. Tempers flared. At several points, it appeared inevitable that the effort would disintegrate entirely. Yet Clay persisted, reshaping proposals, separating votes, and timing debates with almost theatrical instinct. He knew when to press forward and when to allow silence to do its work. When the compromise finally passed, the reaction was telling. There were no cheers, no triumphal speeches. Instead, there was a subdued quiet, the sound of a nation exhaling after nearly suffocating itself. No one had truly won. Northern representatives resented the admission of another slave state. Southern leaders bristled at any federal restriction on slavery's future expansion. Western settlers worried that the artificial line drawn across the continent would one day become a border of hostility rather than order. Yet the Union had survived. It was in this uneasy aftermath that Henry Clay's reputation crystallized. Newspapers began referring to him as the Great Compromiser. Some meant it as praise, an acknowledgement of rare political skill. Others used it as an accusation, implying weakness, moral evasion, or ambition masked as moderation. Clay accepted the title without illusion. He never claimed that compromise was virtuous in itself. He believed it was necessary, the only alternative to dissolution in a nation too diverse, too vast, and too young to endure absolutism. Privately, Clay worried that the compromise might be misunderstood as resolution rather than delay. He knew the line drawn across the map could not erase the deeper conflict written into American society. But he also knew that time mattered. Institutions needed to mature. Citizens needed to grow accustomed to being one people. In choosing compromise, Clay chose imperfection over catastrophe. From this moment forward, he would no longer be seen merely as a skilled legislator or eloquent speaker. He had become a symbol, for better or worse, of the belief that the Union could be preserved through patience rather than force. The name, the Great Compromiser, was not born of admiration alone. It was born of necessity, forged in the knowledge that without men willing to stand between extremes, the American experiment might not survive long enough to be tested by history. Chapter 8. The Election of 1824. Power without the Presidency. The presidential election of 1824 revealed a truth that many Americans were not yet ready to face. The old political order was fading, and nothing stable had replaced it. The nation found itself choosing among four major candidates, all from the same party, all claiming to represent the will of the people, and none able to command a majority. When the votes were counted, no candidate had won outright. According to the Constitution, the decision moved to the House of Representatives, where each state would cast a single vote. It was a moment heavy with uncertainty. Public confidence wavered. Newspapers warned of manipulation. The Republic's mechanisms were functioning, but barely. Henry Clay was not among the final three candidates eligible for selection. Yet, as Speaker of the House, he held extraordinary influence. More importantly, he possessed something rarer than authority: trust across factions, earned through years of negotiation and compromise. Clay faced a choice that would define his legacy as much as any legislation. He believed that Andrew Jackson, though popular, lacked the temperament and respect for constitutional restraint required for the presidency. John Quincy Adams, by contrast, embodied administrative experience and national vision, qualities Clay valued deeply. Behind closed doors, Clay urged representatives to support Adams. When the House elected John Quincy Adams as president, the reaction was swift and furious. Jackson's supporters cried betrayal. They accused Clay of manipulating the process, of defying the popular will. When Adams later appointed Clay as Secretary of State, the accusations hardened into a single, damaging phrase: corrupt bargain. The charge struck deep. Clay denied any secret agreement, insisting that his support for Adams was based on principle, not ambition. Yet in politics, perception often matters more than truth. To many Americans, Clay appeared not as a guardian of the Union, but as a calculating insider, a man who wielded power without earning it at the ballot box. The damage was lasting. His reputation, carefully built over decades, was suddenly clouded by suspicion. Political cartoons mocked him. Speeches echoed with resentment. The label followed him relentlessly, poisoning future presidential campaigns. And yet, even in disgrace, Clay continued to work. As Secretary of State, he pursued diplomatic stability and national coherence, largely ignoring the personal cost. He understood that history often punishes those who act in moments of uncertainty, especially when outcomes cannot be cleanly explained. The election of 1824 taught Clay a bitter lesson. One could shape the destiny of the nation without ever possessing its highest office, and pay a heavier price for doing so. He had exercised power in service of what he believed was the Union's best interest. But the presidency would remain beyond his reach, not because he lacked influence, but because influence without popularity was easily mistaken for corruption. As the nation moved forward, Henry Clay carried both authority and accusation, a reminder that in American democracy, the most consequential decisions are often the most misunderstood. Chapter 9. Secretary of State and a Divided Reputation, 1825 to 1829. When Henry Clay accepted the post of Secretary of State in 1825, he stepped into an office long regarded as a gateway to the presidency. For decades, it had been the position of statesmen, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, men whose diplomatic service seemed to naturally precede national leadership. For Clay, the appointment appeared both logical and ominous. To his supporters, it was recognition of ability. To his enemies, it was proof of corruption. The charge of a corrupt bargain followed him into the State Department like a shadow. Every treaty, every diplomatic initiative was scrutinized not for merit, but for motive. Clay worked under a cloud of suspicion that no official success could fully dispel. Yet his vision remained expansive. As Secretary of State under John Quincy Adams, Clay pursued policies aimed at stabilizing the Western Hemisphere. He supported the independence of Latin American nations, advocated for expanded trade, and resisted European efforts to reclaim influence in the Americas. His diplomacy reflected the same philosophy that guided his domestic politics: strong institutions, balanced power, and peaceful resolution over coercion. But these achievements won him little affection at home. The political climate was shifting rapidly. Andrew Jackson's rise transformed American politics into something louder, more personal, and less forgiving. Campaigns appealed directly to mass emotion rather than legislative skill. In this new environment, Clay's careful reasoning and institutional loyalty felt out of step, even elitist. Clay sensed the change with growing unease. He understood that his power no longer came from office alone. It came from relationships, from credibility built slowly and tested often. Titles could be taken. Influence, once lost, was far harder to recover. Within the Adams administration, Clay was indispensable. Outside it, he was polarizing. Crowds that once listened respectfully now shouted accusations. Newspapers framed his career as ambition disguised as virtue.
Even former allies hesitated, wary of being associated with his controversy. Still, Clay did not retreat into bitterness. He remained disciplined, methodical, and deeply committed to the idea that the Republic was larger than any individual's career. He continued to argue that stability required patience, a message increasingly drowned out by populist enthusiasm. By the time Adams left office in 1829, it was clear that Clay's path to the presidency had narrowed, perhaps permanently. Yet something else had become equally clear to him. True power did not reside in the State Department, nor in the presidency itself. It lived in moments of crisis, in the ability to persuade when institutions trembled. Clay had learned that offices came and went, but the need for compromise endured. As he prepared to return to the Senate, Henry Clay carried a reputation both respected and resented.
He had held one of the nation's highest offices, yet stood politically wounded. Still, beneath the damage, his purpose remained intact, to serve not as a symbol of victory, but as a keeper of balance in a nation perpetually at risk of losing it. Chapter 10. The Rise of Andrew Jackson. Politics turns brutal. By the late 1820s, American politics had changed its tone and its temperament. The careful language of consensus was giving way to something sharper, louder, and more personal. At the center of this transformation stood Andrew Jackson, a war hero turned political force, and across from him, increasingly isolated, stood Henry Clay. The contest between Jackson and Clay was not merely political, it was philosophical. Jackson presented himself as the voice of the common man, suspicious of institutions, impatient with deliberation, and willing to bend rules in the name of popular will. His supporters saw strength and authenticity. His critics saw volatility. A man who treated opposition not as disagreement, but as disloyalty. Clay saw danger. To him, the Republic depended on institutions, Congress, courts, and law, not personalities. Power concentrated in one man, no matter how popular, threatened the delicate balance that held the Union together. Where Jackson trusted instinct and force of will, Clay trusted process, debate, and restraint. Their rivalry intensified after Jackson's victory in 1828. Campaigns became brutal. Personal attacks replaced policy arguments. Newspapers aligned openly with factions, distorting facts to inflame loyalty. Politics ceased to be a forum for persuasion and became a battlefield for domination. Clay returned to the United States Senate as Jackson took the presidency, positioning himself as the administration's most formidable opponent. From his seat, Clay defended congressional authority against what he viewed as executive overreach. He spoke calmly but relentlessly, warning that unchecked power, even when cloaked in popular support, could erode the Republic from within. Nowhere was the clash more visible than in debates over the national bank and federal economic policy. Jackson framed the bank as an enemy of the people. Clay viewed it as a stabilizing force essential to national coherence. Their arguments echoed across the nation, dividing communities and redefining political loyalty. The tone of governance hardened. Compromise was increasingly framed as weakness. Patience became suspicion. The public appetite shifted toward decisive action, even at the cost of institutional damage. Clay felt the change deeply. His career had been built on the belief that disagreement could be managed, that reason could still prevail over impulse. Under Jackson, that belief seemed increasingly fragile. Yet Clay refused to adapt by imitation. He would not shout louder or strike lower. Instead, he became a guardian of the old republic, insisting that liberty without restraint would not endure. His speeches grew more urgent, less hopeful, but no less measured. In private moments, Clay recognized the irony. He had once championed bold action during the War of 1812. Now he found himself defending caution against a nation intoxicated by populist confidence. The clash between Jackson and Clay revealed a deeper truth. America was choosing between two futures. One defined by personal authority and immediate gratification. The other by institutions, compromise, and slow consensus. Neither man would fully defeat the other, but in their struggle, American politics crossed a threshold, leaving behind an era where persuasion reigned, and entering one where power would increasingly be contested through conflict rather than consensus. As night settled over the capital, Henry Clay remained at his desk, aware that the union he had spent a lifetime holding together was now being tested by a new and unpredictable force. The will of the people, unleashed without restraint. Chapter 11. The Nullification Crisis. Another near collapse. 1832 to 1833. In the winter of 1832, the Union faced a danger unlike any it had known since the Missouri Crisis. This time, the threat did not come from a territory seeking admission, but from a state openly challenging federal authority. South Carolina, outraged by high protective tariffs, declared those federal laws null and void within its borders. Its leaders argued that a state had the right to reject any national law it deemed unconstitutional. Behind the legal language lay something far more volatile: the possibility that one act of defiance could unravel the entire Union. President Andrew Jackson responded with fury. Though a champion of states' rights in rhetoric, he would not tolerate disobedience. He threatened military force, requesting congressional authority to compel compliance. The nation watched uneasily as two absolutes collided: state sovereignty versus federal supremacy, each unwilling to yield. Civil war, once again, seemed possible. Henry Clay understood the stakes immediately. Jackson's resolve was real, and South Carolina's defiance was equally entrenched. If either side prevailed completely, the Union might not survive the victory. Clay moved into action. He did not defend nullification, nor did he endorse coercion. Instead, he searched for a path that allowed both sides to step back without humiliation. For weeks, he worked behind the scenes, drafting language, recalculating tariffs, and speaking quietly with senators who feared what public speeches could not resolve. The result was the Compromise Tariff of 1833. The legislation proposed a gradual reduction of tariffs over a decade, allowing South Carolina to claim relief while preserving federal authority. It offered no instant triumph. It demanded patience and faith that delay could diffuse confrontation. When the compromise was presented, neither side was satisfied. Jackson remained wary. South Carolina's leaders bristled. Yet exhaustion and fear proved stronger than pride. The bill passed. South Carolina rescinded its nullification ordinance. The crisis ended without bloodshed. Once again, Henry Clay had stood between the nation and fragmentation. Yet the pattern was becoming familiar and troubling. Each compromise seemed harder than the last. Each resolution left deeper scars. Clay knew the compromise did not resolve the underlying tensions between North and South. It merely postponed their explosion. but postponement mattered. Time allowed institutions to function. Time allowed generations to change. As the country exhaled in relief, Clay returned to his seat, older and increasingly aware of the weight he carried. He had preserved the Union yet again, not through force, but through negotiation that satisfied no one and saved everyone. History would later debate whether compromise delayed justice or prevented disaster. Clay accepted that uncertainty. In moments of near collapse, he believed survival came first. The Union endured, not because it was unbreakable, but because, once more, Henry Clay refused to let it break. Chapter 12. Slavery expands west. The old wound reopens. 1840s. By the 1840s, Henry Clay was no longer the restless young speaker or the confident architect of compromise. He was an aging statesman, marked by loss, political defeat, and the quiet knowledge that time was no longer on his side. Yet the nation he had spent a lifetime holding together was once again drifting toward its most dangerous question. The Mexican-American War transformed the map of the United States almost overnight. Vast new territories, California, New Mexico, Utah, and beyond, were added to the Republic. The land promised opportunity, wealth, and expansion, but with it came an old and unresolved wound. Would slavery follow the flag westward? The question returned with renewed fury. Northern lawmakers pushed to restrict slavery's expansion, arguing that new territories should belong to free labor. Southern leaders warned that exclusion threatened their political survival and violated constitutional equality. The debates were sharper now, less patient. Compromise, once viewed as necessary, was increasingly treated as moral failure. Clay watched this shift with deep concern. He had long opposed slavery in principle, calling it a moral and political evil. Yet he also believed that sudden rupture would destroy the Union before it could reform itself. To Clay, preservation remained the first responsibility. Though weakened by illness and years of exhaustion, Clay refused to retreat. He returned to the Senate, his presence quieter but no less commanding. Younger men filled the chamber, men less willing to concede, more eager to draw lines that could not be crossed. Clay tried to remind them of history. He spoke of earlier crises, of moments when absolutism nearly ended the Republic. He warned that treating political enemies as moral monsters made coexistence impossible. But the nation was changing. The territories taken from Mexico intensified every argument. Each proposal carried existential weight. California's admission as a free state, the status of slavery in the Southwest, and the fate of fugitive slaves all collided in a volatile mix. The Union, once again, stood on the edge. Privately, Clay felt the weight of failure pressing closer. He sensed that his generation might be the last capable of holding the nation together without violence. Yet resignation was never in his nature. Even as his voice weakened, his conviction hardened. If compromise had delayed disaster before, perhaps it could do so again. In the twilight of his career, Henry Clay understood that time was no longer an abstract resource. It was personal. Each year gained mattered not only for the nation, but for the hope that a peaceful resolution might still emerge. The old wound had reopened, and though many believed it could only be closed by force, Clay prepared, one final time, to argue that endurance, not rupture, was still the Union's only chance. Chapter 13. The Compromise of 1850. Last Stand of a Statesman. In 1850, Henry Clay returned to the Senate, knowing that this time might be his last. His body was failing him. Years of illness had thinned his frame and weakened his voice. He could no longer command the chamber with the booming oratory of his youth. Yet, when he rose to speak, the room still listened. Not out of fear or admiration, but out of recognition. The nation was once again at a breaking point. The territories acquired from Mexico had reignited every unresolved question about slavery. California sought admission as a free state. The South demanded guarantees. The North insisted on limits. Tempers flared, and talk of secession was no longer theoretical. It was spoken aloud, with intent. Clay believed that if this crisis failed, the Union might not survive another. Despite his frailty, he proposed a sweeping plan, what would become known as the Compromise of 1850. It was not a single law, but a fragile bundle of concessions. California would enter as a free state. New territories would decide the slavery question for themselves. The slave trade would end in Washington, D.C., while a stricter fugitive slave law would appease the South. No side was satisfied. Debate turned vicious. Senators accused one another of betrayal, cowardice, even treason. Clay endured the attacks quietly, aware that his physical strength was fading faster than the nation's patience. On some days, he was too ill to speak at all, forced to watch as others defended or dismantled his work. Younger senators took up the fight. Daniel Webster spoke for unity. Stephen A. Douglas maneuvered the legislation through procedural obstacles. Clay, watching from his seat or from his sickbed, understood that leadership sometimes meant letting others carry the weight. When the compromise finally passed, there was no sense of victory, only delay. The Union had been preserved, again. But this time, even Clay knew the cost. The compromises had grown harsher. The moral divide had deepened. Each solution required greater sacrifice and yielded less hope. Still, the result mattered. The Compromise of 1850 bought the nation nearly a decade of time. A decade in which industries grew, populations shifted, and leaders emerged who would face the final reckoning. For Henry Clay, that knowledge was enough. He had stood, weakened but unyielding, one final time between the Union and collapse. He did not claim to have solved America's greatest problem. He had simply refused to let it destroy the nation on his watch. As Clay withdrew from public life, the Republic moved forward on borrowed time. Time purchased by a man who believed that survival, however imperfect, was still a victory worth fighting for.
Chapter 14. The Man Who Never Became President. Henry Clay spent much of his life standing close to the presidency, close enough to feel its pull, close enough to imagine how he might use it, yet he never crossed its threshold. Few men in American history sought the office as often, or with such persistence, only to be turned away each time. Clay ran for president 5 times. In 1824, he finished 4th in a fractured race. In 1832, he challenged Andrew Jackson and was decisively defeated. In 1844, he lost narrowly to James K. Polk, a defeat shaped by westward expansion and the politics of slavery. Each campaign left its mark, not only on his career, but on his understanding of the public he hoped to lead. The paradox of Henry Clay was this: he was widely admired,
yet rarely trusted with ultimate authority. Voters praised his intellect, his eloquence, and his devotion to the Union. They listened to his speeches. They quoted his words. But when asked to place the full weight of executive power in his hands, they hesitated. To some, he seemed too complex, too willing to compromise in an age that increasingly demanded certainty. Clay felt these losses deeply. He was ambitious. He never pretended otherwise. The presidency, to him, was not a prize, but a tool, a means of protecting the republic from its own divisions. Yet with each defeat, he was forced to confront a difficult truth. The nation he worked to preserve did not always reward the skills it most needed. Over time, Clay came to accept this reality with quiet dignity. He began to speak less of personal aspiration and more of institutional responsibility. He recognized that influence did not flow solely from the Oval Office. In moments of crisis, it often came from the margins, from the Senate floor, from private rooms where agreements were shaped, from the trust of rivals who believed he would listen even when he disagreed. Clay's greatest achievements had never depended on executive power. They had come when the nation was most divided, when presidents hesitated or threatened force, and when compromise was the only alternative to collapse. In these moments, Clay had mattered more than any president. As he aged, he understood that history would remember him not for what he failed to become, but for what he chose to do instead. He had traded the certainty of command for the uncertainty of persuasion. He had accepted that his legacy would be measured not in elections won, but in disasters avoided. Henry Clay never sat in the Oval Office, but time and again he shaped the fate of the presidency itself. By preserving the Union, it was meant to govern. In the end, his power lay not in a title, but in the restraint he exercised when power was most tempting and most dangerous.
Chapter 15. Death Before the Storm. 1852. In the early summer of 1852, Henry Clay lay quietly in his room in Washington, D.C., his long career drawing to a close. He was 75 years old, worn down by illness and by decades spent carrying the weight of a divided nation. Outside, the city moved forward, unaware of how close it stood to a storm he would not live to see. On June 29, 1852, Henry Clay died. The news traveled quickly across the country. Church bells rang. Newspapers set aside partisan language. For a brief moment, North and South mourned together. The man who had spent his life preventing rupture was gone, and even his fiercest critics recognized the gravity of the loss. Clay became the first American to lie in state in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. Tens of thousands passed by his coffin. Farmers, veterans, laborers, lawmakers, each paying quiet respect. In that solemn procession, the nation honored not a general or a president, but a legislator whose battlefield had been argument, patience, and restraint. Among those deeply affected was a young Illinois politician named Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln had long admired Clay, calling him his beau ideal of a statesman. He had studied Clay's speeches, learned from his belief in union above ideology, and absorbed the lesson that moral progress without preservation meant nothing at all. Clay's influence would echo in Lincoln's own words years later, when the Union faced its final trial. Henry Clay died 8 years before the Civil War erupted. Some would later argue that his compromises merely delayed the inevitable. Others believed that without him, the war might have come far sooner, under far worse conditions.
Clay himself had never claimed to solve America's greatest contradiction. He had only insisted that it not destroy the nation before it could be confronted. As the country laid him to rest, the fragile peace he had preserved still held. But the tensions remained, coiled beneath the surface, waiting. The Union would soon be tested in ways even Clay could not contain. Yet when the storm finally came, it did so in a nation stronger, larger, and more prepared than the one Clay had inherited. That strength was not accidental. It was earned, slowly, through decades of restraint. Henry Clay, the man who had held the Union together through compromise, was gone. The Union endured, for now. And in that fragile survival lay his final, quiet victory.
Epilogue: The quiet power of compromise. When the Civil War finally erupted in 1861, Henry Clay had been gone for nearly a decade. The Union he had spent his life holding together fractured in the very way he had feared. Cannons replaced speeches. Battlefields replaced chambers of debate. The question Clay had postponed again and again was answered not with words, but with blood. To some, this seemed to confirm his critics. They argued that compromise had only delayed the inevitable, that Clay's deals merely postponed a conflict that could not be avoided. Yet history, when viewed carefully, tells a more complicated story. Without Henry Clay, the war might have come much earlier, before the nation had grown strong enough to survive it. Clay inherited a republic that was fragile, regional, and unsure of itself. He left behind a country with deeper institutions, stronger national identity, and leaders shaped by decades of constitutional struggle. The time he purchased was not empty. It allowed the United States to mature, economically, politically, and morally, in ways that made survival possible when compromise finally failed. Henry Clay did not win in the way history often celebrates. He did not command armies. He did not issue proclamations. He never signed legislation from the Oval Office. In textbooks, his name is often overshadowed by presidents and generals. Yet Clay's influence ran beneath the surface, shaping events without dominating them. He believed that the purpose of politics was not purity, but preservation. That governing a divided people required patience more than passion. And that compromise, though imperfect, was sometimes the only moral choice available in an imperfect world. In moments when absolute victory threatened to shatter the Union, Clay chose restraint. He accepted criticism, suspicion, and failure so that the nation might endure long enough to confront its deepest contradictions. That endurance became his legacy. As we look back from a distance, Henry Clay stands as a reminder that not all power is loud, and not all victories are visible. Some are measured in years gained, disasters avoided, and futures kept alive just long enough to matter. Tonight, as you rest, consider this final question, one that Clay himself might have asked. In an age of certainty and division, does America still have room for those who choose compromise over conquest? If you find meaning in calm, thoughtful histories like this, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps these stories reach others who value reflection over noise. And let us know in the comments, which historical figure should we explore next before sleep gently takes us?